Let me start by expressing my gratitude for being here with us, for your involvement in the school more generally. So you recently joined the CBS board. So thank you so much for your leadership. There's so much ground to cover today. We want to spend some time talking about consulting as an industry, the disruption there, consulting as a career path. But first, I want to jump in and talk a little bit about your career journey.
Yeah.
Can you describe for us that journey, maybe highlighting some of the pivotal moments? What were you thinking at the time? Was this all part of the grand plan?
Should it be the revisionist version where everything's together?
We want the truth, I think.
Well, thank you for having me. And I'm shocked that anyone actually showed up on this beautiful day, but thank you. I'm humbled by it. So I'll do a quick version. But I started out of undergrad at Boston College, go Eagles. And I went into sales and trading. And I don't know why, other than they said, oh, obviously, if you go into sales and trading, you'll be rich in 2 years. And so I said, that sounds good to me. And so that obviously did not happen. But I had a career in sales and trading. I worked at JPMorgan. Fascinating. Learned a lot. It was actually before and then during the financial crisis. And so that was quite a learning experience. And then I left and started my own fund with my boss and a couple of other people because it seemed like a lot of disruption, a good time to go try something. And so we were basically doing what we did at JPMorgan, but for private money. I said, but I'd like to still get an MBA, and I kind of want to do the full experience. And so Michael will know what I actually wrote in my essay because he helped me, coached me through some of that stuff many years ago. It's almost 20 years ago now. But I came to Columbia. Now I still was spending time at my fund, and in fact, I had this crazy schedule where for the first year where we had the core, it was offset in days. So Monday and Wednesday, I would come on campus in the morning and do the core. Then I'd drive up to Connecticut, and then I'd do the reverse on Tuesday and Thursday. And it was just because I wanted to kind of stay in the mix there, and it was our own thing. But you fast forward, I actually did that my first summer as well, back at my company. And then I was just saying, how did I end up leaving? Well, I was sitting at the desk in July next to my partners, and I was like, damn, what we were doing is really, really specific. And it's the only thing I've ever done before. And if I either get bored or this doesn't work, I'm kind of screwed. And so I literally said to them, is there any way you would buy out my share in this partnership? And they said, obviously, if it's a low enough price. And I said, no, it's got to be the right price. And over the course of a few weeks, I did that. I sold my share in the partnership. The firm was called Dreadnought Capital. And I was really happy. I got a little bit of money in my pocket. And I remember calling my dad and then being like, oh, that's great. Yeah. He's like, the hell are you going to do next? Like, you don't have enough money. You're not retiring. It's not that much. It's not really a lot of money. And I was like, wow, that's a good point. And I have to say, I got very, very lucky. I've never attended a single recruiting event in my time at Columbia because I missed them all. And I applied to 2 places. And one of them was McKinsey, another one was a bank's private equity group, and they ended up getting back to me in December, and I got very, very lucky that McKinsey took me. In fact, they almost didn't take me. I actually applied to the Washington, D.C. office. They said, so I did my interview. They said, that slate performance was kind of high, but New Jersey will take you. I said, I'll take New Jersey, no big deal, and I'm happy to do it. And so I ended up joining McKinsey as a greenfield hire. Never had done consulting before, and my decision was pretty simple about the why on it. One, I wanted to go to a place that would, frankly, build resume equity over time because I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. Still don't. And then 2, someplace that wouldn't pigeonhole me, someplace where I could see lots of sectors, lots of functions, and that would give me a lot of option value after my 2 years at McKinsey that I intended to spend like most people do. And so, that was in 2011 when all that happened, and been at McKinsey ever since.
Right. Well, you've reinvented your role at McKinsey a number of times. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah, I've had a lot of chapters, which is actually one of the reasons why I love what we do, but also it's a bit of the structure. And some of you all, I see some face in here, spent some time in consulting firms, the professional freedom, the ability to actually, we call it taking the pen and architecting your own professional journey. And as I say to people, it actually is true. It's not BS. Now you have to go in and prove that you can do the thing at the level, the competency level. But then once you've proven that, then it really is yours to architect. So I grew up in our firm's marketing and sales practice. I'm very much a functional person. And part of the thinking there was I wanted to be able to leave McKinsey at some point and say, not just that I do strategy, but that I know something about something concrete. So pricing, sales. So I went down that path, and I've done that work since I started, really since I was an associate. And that kind of thread continues to this day. I lead a bunch of our client service with a bunch of private equity funds, doing mainly commercial work in their portfolio, the retail client, and a range of others. After I got elected partner, though, I was feeling a little bit, I don't want to say bored, because I was still serving the clients I wanted to serve with great people, but I was feeling a bit unfulfilled. And so I had this idea, well, we have these think tanks at McKinsey that do research on mainly economic and business topics. And I got very interested in this topic of economic mobility and economic inclusion, right? How do you make the economic engine turn for more people? Because we've all seen we've seen the data on income and wealth disparity. And so I started writing research papers off the side of my desk, again, in professional freedom, and literally no practice, just me and a couple colleagues started writing these papers. And we wrote this piece called The Economic Impact of Closing Wealth Gaps. And I'll never forget, because we wrote this piece, and we had done all this modeling, econometric modeling around what it could mean for the U.S. economy. And I was sitting on my couch, and this was during the election, I guess, that Joe Biden won. But at the time, Vice President Harris was a candidate for president. So this must have been whatever it was, 2019. And she referenced the paper in her speech. And I was like, oh shit, did we check the footnote? Like, and I literally couldn't believe it. And then 2 weeks later, I saw it cited in a Supreme Court case, because someone found it and they sent it to us in an amicus brief. And by the way, it was also this moment of reflection, which is when you go to an institution that is old, that where people have labored to develop the credibility, that you have to take such care with how you use it. But it is an incredible platform. And so, long story short, I fast forward to COVID-19, wrote this paper, COVID-19 Investing in Black Lives and Livelihoods. And the whole premise was, this was April of 2020, if you look at underlying housing conditions, comorbid health conditions, the jobs that certain communities are in, you should expect double impact to simplify on certain communities. And so we wrote this piece, again, side of our desk, no practice. And we had it out in the world, did a couple interviews, I think I did CNBC or something. And then I get a call a month later from this guy called Bob Sternfels. And he was our COO of McKinsey. I don't know this guy from anywhere. I mean, I don't know him. He's an operations guy. And he's like, hey. And so I was like, he's like, this is Bob. And Bob is now our CEO, by the way. And he said, what's this thing that you wrote? And I was like, I'm getting fired. I knew it was eventually I was going to get fired, because I was just doing stuff. I was just out doing stuff. I was going through all the risk checks and stuff. But he was like, what practice did this? I was like, the nights and weekend practice. This is just some people who care. And he pauses. He's a really high energy guy. And he pauses and he's like, I like it. He's like, why don't you make it a thing? And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, make it a thing, institutionalize it. This is a capability that should exist beyond, your stay at the firm. Maybe I am getting fired. But anyway, we did it. We launched the Institute. It's now called the Institute for Economic Mobility. It's an enduring think tank. And so that was the second chapter. And actually, I started serving a lot of clients on this topic of economic inclusion, which I told people you could do, because I said people actually care about this and it's relevant to our clients. So we started to serve banks on how they serve the underbanked and the credit invisible. We started serving universities around how to serve certain populations, how to identify certain populations. We serve consumer companies who were trying to reach lower income consumers and help them think about the actual needs of those consumers, whether it be we did a bunch of stuff on food deserts and how do we get healthy food in certain communities. So that was the second chapter, and that continues on as well in parallel. My most recent chapter, pause, this was long, about almost 2 years ago, when Bob was elected managing partner for a second term, our CEO, we got to know each other through the Institute, again, unintended. He called me up and said, hey, I'd love you to join McKinsey's operating committee to run insights, reputation, and engagement. So I lead all of our institutes. I'm our CMO, what most people would say, but we don't use that term for whatever reason. But I look after marketing and brand for our firm, external communications, internal communications, our GSR, good business practices. And so I'm a member of our 15-person OpCo. And that's been my third chapter, and they all kind of run in parallel.
Amazing. I mean, it actually does seem very intentional at points, I will say.
Thank you.
It does.
We learned how to do storytelling when I was an associate at McKinsey.
No. But this idea that inclusive growth is important. Yeah. It's a passion that you have. So I wanted to ask you to make the case for the students. Can you say a little more about it?
Yeah, sorry, let me silence that. I also run media relations, and there's always something going on if you don't follow. We're always in the media about something. Look, I think it's really simple. If you make upstream investments in communities to ensure that at least people have an opportunity and a chance, the payoff downstream is, the ROI is, it's without question. You can look at every study. We've actually done this. We've cataloged all the economic mobility studies that have ever been done in academia. And the data is robust because you end up with people who are higher skilled and more productive in the labor force. That translates to wages, which translates to consumption. By the way, you also end up with a population that is healthier, which has huge implications for one of the biggest costs in our system. By the way, incarceration rates go down. And so it's this virtuous cycle. It's hard because the investment, there's this timing component, obviously. And you have to, and there's this question of who, is it government? Is it the private sector? Who needs to make these investments and build these ecosystems around, what I call underserved communities broadly? By the way, we're spending a lot of time looking at rural America right now because I'm quite concerned about what's happening economically, and then that speaks to some of the maybe social and political issues and all these other things, and so that we're having across the country and this division. But we have to invest upstream if we want to get the maximum benefit out of our collective economy and this collective abundance. And I think it's just good to do because I think in general people might get along a little better. And so, this is, we've written extensively about it, but I think it's pretty clear.
So you mentioned this recent focus on the gap in rural communities, the mobility gap in rural communities. That's not where you started, though, right? So you started originally with Black communities, and then you expanded the scope to rural communities, to Latino communities. Tell us a little bit about
the philosophy. We just did it very analytically. We looked at economic mobility rates. We looked at that other school up in Cambridge.
That we don't mention here.
But the work that Raj Chetty had been doing on economic mobility, and we just said, what are the cohorts that have the lowest levels of mobility, and it's the whole curve cut effect. Like the theory is if we could solve it for the groups that have the biggest gaps, then you can then take those lessons and port them over. And so I actually would say the economic mobility thing we're looking at is actually looking at it broadly. We're looking at it for really the 100 million Americans, but then we kind of have cohort-specific things that we look at because of some of the differences in geography and so on. But I think we have to be having a broad conversation about economic mobility, and you're seeing even more urgency around the discussion with all the uncertainty around AI and what that could do to even further some of the challenges. And I just think it's an important topic, and it's an increasingly important topic. I was at Davos this year, and I was surprised. I mean, we were talking about it in global, like this whole. So it's fascinating. We wrote this book called Century of Plenty. And the whole theory of it is there's actually abundance in the world. It's a distribution question. If you look forward, and we try to prove it out analytically, I think we did a decent job of that. I wasn't involved in the work. But if you look at wealth disparity, so there's two dimensions. There's kind of wealth disparity across countries and then within. And if you kind of take all that as 100% of the wealth disparity that exists, it's flipped. Most of the wealth disparity that existed globally was between countries, in the early 20th century and up through the mid. But because many emerging market economies have gotten stronger, I mean, we know all the countries. Now the vast majority of it is existing within. And that's a really challenging thing for societies to grapple with, especially if it continues to accelerate.
Yep. And what does success mean for the Institute 5 years from now?
It has to be about impact, right? It has to be, did we meaningfully move the needle with the tools that are available to us? So one example is, did our research spur a set of activities or initiatives? One of the things I'm proudest of is I can name 10 firms that were started based on the founder. This is their own words, based on the founders reading our work. A number of private credit funds. And let's see how that all plays out as you all follow in that market. But so that's one. Did we get to a bunch of clients that are in the financial services sector who can really move the needle on banking and underbanked? Did we significantly shift the dialogue? And then I think I'd be disingenuous if I didn't say, as the head of reputation, did we get reputational benefits that were meaningful? Because I think our license to operate as a firm, and not everyone agrees with me, by the way, I think our license to operate as a firm is contingent upon people believing that we are also a positive force for good in society. And I think we are as an institution, but I think we have to say it, we have to get it out there.
I also think the Institute is a good example of being entrepreneurial, right? So what lessons can we take from your experience about that? I was going to say, when did it occur to you that you could, pursue this passion of yours in the organization? And I guess, kind of how did you, maybe you didn't intentionally lay the groundwork, but how does one lay the groundwork?
Yeah. Look, I think there's a few, I've talked about this, faculty at our new partner orientation, people always get asked that question because everyone's thinking about what their next journey is going to be. And I'd say this to new folks as well. The first thing is really, really simple. You have to spend time investing at being good at the job. So many people come in and they're like, oh, make my own McKinsey. Just give me the pen. Let me write my story. You don't even know what we do. How can you? So, and why would anyone give you the resources and the platform before they're convinced that you have an appreciation for the core of what we do? So invest your time in learning the craft, whatever you go do, whatever craft that is. The second is start small. I started with the research reports on the side of the desk. I've been laying the groundwork with a bunch of different initiatives over the years that were smaller, maybe a convening here, getting colleagues together, getting executives together. Start small and ladder to it, because then when you go for the big ask, you got a track record. right? That you can actually supporters, and you can say this matters, it's important for the institution, and then you have to accept the risk. I mean, so many. It's it's not the same risk as going out and starting something. I've done that, and I don't think we were wildly successful at that, by the way, which is also part of the reason I left. But it was fine. But you have to accept that there could be downside and that it might not work, and that's okay. So those are my three things.
Thank you. All right, so maybe we should shift to talking about the consulting industry. Right. So, a lot of disruption in professional services. McKinsey's been kind of at the center of that. I want to focus a little bit on operations at McKinsey and how that has changed. As I understand it, Quantum Black, McKinsey Digital now drive 40% of your work. Is that correct?
Yep, that's probably a bigger point. If I said kind of digital analytics and AI, or tech broadly, it's probably even more than that.
Yeah. Your CEO recently said that the total workforce is 40,000 humans and 25,000 AI agents.
Okay. He did say that.
Did say that. So,
I was there. Yeah, I was there.
I think it was like 5,000 AI agents the year before. So it's been a massive change. But how is that changing this one firm model thing you have? And how is it shaping the day-to-day work at McKinsey?
Yeah. So let me take it in two pieces.
Do it.
The first piece is we have functions like every other company does. We have a global finance group. We have my function. It's about 600 people around the globe. We've got a huge risk group, a legal group, an IT group. So we have a lot of colleagues that work in the support functions, and I have the privilege of leading one of those teams. One of the few people that get to actually see what it's like to be an operator at a consulting firm. It's hard. Much harder than I thought it was when I was giving clients advice, by the way. But we are really investing to figure out where we can leverage technology in our functions. But we have a few thousand people in visual graphics for us that help us essentially bring our insights and recommendations into the real world, the deck, if you will. And by the way, the deck are starting to disappear for a variety of reasons.
Okay.
But we probably don't need that many people doing that because there are a lot of, hopefully you all invested in some of those solutions out there that AI lends itself to this kind of a thing. And so if you go across our different functions, I lead publishing, right? We're the second largest business publisher behind HBR, like pure play business publisher. Publishing lends itself to a lot of AI applications, and we've been leading on that in our firm. And so there's a whole bunch of work going on there, and we'll continue to do that. On the consulting side, and the media loves to jump the gun on these things. They're already backtracking. I think I just saw an article that said, "Oh, we were wrong. OpenAI, they do need consult." Like it just. And what I would say is, there is no doubt that the latest wave of technology, which is changing by the day, is changing what we do in the team room. But the idea that it is massively disrupting the business model, I just haven't seen it. I haven't seen it in anyone's. I would just go to the numbers. I just haven't seen it, and I think there's a few reasons why. But let me tell you how it's disrupting. How it's disrupting the team room in a way that makes us more productive. We are able to get to first order synthesis and insights just significantly faster. I used to go to a team on a Friday after the first week, and I'd say, what's the week one answer to this thing we're working on for the client? And the team will have done a whole bunch of stuff, and they'll have an answer, and the answer was okay, but at least we had a starting point for where we needed to go. Today with technology, I go in on Monday at noon, and I say, what is the day zero answer? And that day zero answer, if they've done what they need to do, right? If they've leveraged our own, internal, our own internal model, they're good problem solvers, so they've done the right prompting, they fed the right things in. That day zero starting point is better than the week 2 answer was before. Now, people say, well, does that mean it's over? But the reality of it is, we are now able to refocus on the 2 or 3 things that really matter for that problem and get to a better answer on those, and then move to how do we actually help our client think about going to implement this? That's one way. The second thing that I try to push on our friends in the media, I won't say which outlets, is what we've seen with technology in the past is it actually has just enabled McKinsey, all firms that do what we do, to solve harder problems. So the problems that we solve now, and that we're going to solve in 5 years and 10 years, it's going to make the stuff that we're doing 10 years ago laughable. Don Barton loves to tell this story. He was our former global managing partner. His first study was how many chicken nuggets should be in the box. Is it six or 4, right? And that was 40 years ago. But the tools were different. He was going to the library at McKinsey, getting the documents out. He's drafting on a big drafting board. So of course, the problems that you can solve are different. The problems that we can solve and the level of confidence we can have in, the answer and the scenarios that bound it just goes up. So what I tell my teams is, I expect you to be using AI, hopefully in every single thing that you're doing in the team room. And by the way, I'm on my teams. How did you? At the end of the week, I don't want to create process, but tell me the 10 ways you guys use technology this week to get to a better answer for our client.
Amazing. And to what extent are clients saying, it's so easy to get data now with AI, it's so easy to synthesize that data. What's the value added?
It's funny. Everyone, I get conceptually that we should expect that.
Yeah.
But I just haven't seen it. And by the way, part of this is that's why I'm always fascinated, because people conflate what technology can do and what it will do. We spent a lot of time as an operating committee on the topic of our own AI transformation, and so we were out in Palo Alto visiting some other school out there. By the way, that's because Bob went there. I would have rather have us be here with our AI folks. No one elected me global managing partner, and so. But we visited a bunch of the hyperscalers. It's like, 40% of things can go away tomorrow. And I'm like, that may be true. The technology may be that good. They've never sat and spent real time with a management team who's grappling with this. Like, I'm just being honest. I have clients. I'm probably a handful of clients, different sectors. They're still debating whether or not Copilot's a good idea. Like, I'm just saying those are maybe laggards. But the point is, to change institutions, it is hard, it takes time, and so the technology is evolving rapidly. The adoption and how you actually move institutions, and there's all sorts of reasons why, it's going to take significantly longer, right? And so that's why on the other, they're not saying, well, hey, all this is super easy to do with technology, because they don't actually have a good grasp of it yet in many instances. And of course, there are some institutions that are leading. It's a risk, though, for companies. Because I do think for the budding entrepreneurs in this room, I think being an incumbent right now in any industry, absent big regulated industries and things, or big capital intensive industries, is a risky proposition. I'd be sitting in this chair thinking about, what's the AI native thing that I could build? Because these companies are going to be too slow to move in some places, which I'm sure you all are well aware of.
And so is that the focus for the most part with clients?
Well, I think we're trying to get clients to move. We're trying to get them to see that there's a huge opportunity here. And we'll do everything from just trying to get broad-based adoption of productivity tools at the simplest level. But then, some more advanced clients doing real domain transformations. Right? I have a retail client, and we built an agentic solution that basically tells their district managers who manage 70 stores how to spend their week. And it's free flow. And hey, I'm going to store number 380. And they say, yeah, you need to go to store number 220 instead, because there's $50,000 of sales at risk. Why are the sales at risk? Well, they've been out of stock. in these 10 places. In the last 3 times you went there, the dumpsters were dirty. And so like, there are some use case, right? It's like domains and use cases that are moving, but I would say that's the exception, not the rule.
Interesting. Great. So can we talk about pricing?
Yeah.
Tell me, this new outcome-based fee. Tell us a little bit about what does that look like in practice?
Yeah.
Many questions about that.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, look, by the way, we have not seen any pricing pressure at all.
Interesting.
But we do believe that outcome-based pricing, which by the way, we've been doing for 20 years, and it's already, I think, somewhere between 30 and 40% of what we do, and in some regions, even higher, particularly in our emerging markets. And it's pretty straightforward, right? We will underwrite an outcome. So whether it is procurement transformation, where we get paid based on some percentage of the actual, validated savings of the client, if it's some sort of retail transformation, some metric tied to sales per square, profit per square foot in the box. And they come in all different flavors, but the spirit of it is we will underwrite the outcome side by side with you. And some clients love it, some clients don't. You'd be surprised at how often we offer it, and clients will just prefer fixed because they can be a little bit complicated. But I think we actually prefer them, because then there's actually no question at the end about whether we deliver the impact. I think there are many senior partners in our firm, including one who used to lead the New York office and many senior roles for us, a mentor of mine, who would prefer if we were 100% that way, because then you're in some ways unimpeachable about the impact you delivered. That's probably not a realistic goal, because it's not appropriate in all situations. But
is it shaping which clients you're willing to take on, or would it shape which clients you're willing to take on?
The more ambitious, the more ambitious clients, the clients who want to do bigger things, those are the clients where you're probably investing more time because we're unlocking these bigger opportunities. The scale of some of these client service opportunities that we have today, again, compared to 20 years ago, it's just, if you're doing it at risk, it is much easier for the client to say, yeah, we're going to go big on this thing. We do need more help, but you're only going to get paid if it delivers.
Can you make a prediction 5 years out? What would the typical McKinsey engagement look like?
I think 5 years out, oh my goodness, technology changing every 3 months. But no, I think we will still have, I think, traditional client service teams. I don't know the exact shape of them. They will be augmented by more agents and technology. They will be much more about getting to the impact as opposed to the insight part of it. And the problems will be more complex.
All right, let's talk a little bit about consulting as a career path. A lot of students here who are either recruiting for consulting, who are already consultants. You are piloting something kind of new, right? Well, you're piloting several things new, but one thing that you're piloting new has to do with, I think is it called Lily?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about Lily and how it's changing the nature of the work and maybe how the role it's playing in the selection process?
Yeah, so Lily is our internal language model, sits on top of Gemini, but it basically has the corpus of knowledge that we've created over the 100-year history, indexed to more recent things, obviously. And I mean, it speeds up the cycle time. And by the way, for me as a senior partner, one of the things that I worry about is some of the things I would have gone to an associate for, I don't. It's like, oh, I'm going to have a meeting with the CEO of this company. I would normally ask for a memo and then actually do some back and forth. And that was actually the apprenticeship. That was actually where you got to teach in these kind of informal moments. Now I'm like, Lily, got this meeting. Lily's like, tell me about it. And then Lily turns it around in 30 seconds. And so But in general, our consultants are using it to help structure issue trees, to help do the first pass at analysis. You used to have to go to our intranet and say, give me the best framework for sales excellence in software. Now you go to Lily, and Lily gives you the latest thinking and gives you who the experts are. And so it is speeding up the cycle time, making it easier to access information. There is I do worry that there's some lost apprenticeship, some lost human to human that we have to figure out ways to supplement for, and we will. I think all companies will find ways. And then we're also using it to do some evaluation, because we can actually see your thought process, and it's documented, right? If you're using this is the thing that a lot of people, I'm sure this group knows, but a lot of people that I talk to out in the world don't understand that you still need to be a good conceptual thinker and conceptual problem solving to get a good result out of a model. And so actually, I love reading my teams or interviewees' interactions with the model, because I get a sense for whether they actually understand what the next question is that they should be asking and how to interpret what they're seeing. And because using these models will be an increasingly important part of delivering what we do, it makes sense that we'd use them on the front end.
Can you get more specific about what being a good thinking partner for an AI tool looks like, or what's a good question?
So, okay, how do we optimize the profitability in this retail box? You can start with that question, and you're going to get some answer. But how are you thinking about the same way you would structure an issue tree around what are the revenue and cost things, and getting really specific there? You can see it's just like when consultants draw out their issue tree, but now you're actually looking. Did they ask about when they thought about inventory? What are the dimensions they asked about? Did they ask about shrink? Right? Did they ask about on-shelf availability versus what's in the back? So you can just get a sense for the thought process. But it is the same core conceptual problem solving that you learn and that you prepare for in an interview. But you actually can see it, and it's documented it's documented there on a screen. Right. Review.
Do you think there's a good way for students to prepare for that? I mean, is it no different than any interview?
I think it's the same exact way. And I actually think it makes it even better because you can practice unlimited. I don't have to do no offense, I don't have to do the 25, case preps I was doing a year anymore. Now I'll do 10, and you'll get the GPT or Gemini or whatever your favorite thing is to do the others.
All right, can we go back quickly to what you were mentioning about the apprenticeship model?
Yeah.
What should consulting firms do to make sure that there's a way for more junior people to learn the craft?
I think there's still a whole bunch of things in place where people learn the craft. And so I actually work backwards from what are the new breakpoints that exist because of the technology, and start to catalog those. But I actually don't worry about it broadly, because we're still in the team room. We're still doing traditional problem solving. I'm still going to go to a meeting with the CEO and bring a friend who's never been in a meeting like that before, so they can get the apprenticeship through osmosis there. And so I think being deliberate about the human moments, the human connections, making sure you are cataloging those things that are going away so that you make sure you don't lose too much of it.
Yeah.
And then what are you backfilling with? But I haven't seen anything that makes me worried that we're going to lose it all, but that we do need to be mindful of the moments.
All right, thank you. I'm going to hand the mic over to the students in a moment. I have one last question for you. So this is the second time we've met, the second time I've had the opportunity to sit next to you. So we met at the CBS board meeting, and I left that interaction being struck that you seem so optimistic. And so I wanted to give you a chance to kind of share with the students what makes you optimistic about the future.
Good. My executive coach is working on me. That's not a natural optimist, by the way. But in all seriousness, and for me, it's pretty simple. We've gone through all sorts of moments of disruption, even bigger than the moment we're living through now, by the way. Even if you take the geopolitics plus the AI, like we've been through disruption before and find a way through, right? I mean, that's it. It's simple. And I don't need, if you try to get too specific, it's when you become a pessimist. If you're optimistic about the arc and you have a little bit of faith, that will kind of work it through. Humans are incredibly creative creatures, and we'll find we'll create new industries, new jobs. I truly believe all those things. And so, and by the way, there's no value in being a pessimist anyway. It doesn't, it's not that helpful.
All right. It's about the arc.
Yeah, it's about the arc.
I love it. All right. So let's open this up to the students. Any questions?
Hi, Shelley. Thank you so much for being here. I have a question, kind of more around career advice. If you had to distill, you've been obviously very successful throughout your career at McKinsey and in consulting broadly. If you had to distill this career success in 3 or 4 things, what would those be?
Yeah, I think I'll probably hit 2 things that I think are important no matter what you go do. One is obvious, and you're already starting to do it here, but investing in relationships. And not with anything specific in mind from that relationship. But if you broadly invest in getting to know people at every stage of your life and make it relatively broad, not so broad that it's all superficial, but broad enough where you cover a wide waterfront, you will be amazed at how those things come back around when you need them. So invest in that. And in my case, at McKinsey, it was investing internally, and it was investing in a broad network externally. The second thing is an ownership mindset in everything you do. The biggest signal for me anytime I have a new associate on a team of whether they're going to be successful, in the medium to long term, is when they got that work stream that they own, did they take it as if it was their business? As if they had no one else to turn to. They just said, your whole livelihood depends on your ability to run this thing to ground. Do they approach it from that angle? Or are they like, okay, 1 + 1 is 2. What's the next math problem I need to? So if you adopt that ownership mindset in everything that you do and just run that thing to ground, you'll be wildly successful because people will pour and invest into you to get the most out of it. So those would be the 2 things for me.
Question up here.
Thank you. You mentioned how hard it is to change institutions. I built a company that works in the developmental disability industry, and we build technology for people with intellectual disabilities. And the biggest pain point of my company is to sell that technology to agencies, to the institutions. And my question for you is, do you have any tips on how you get this buy-in of not just the CEO, not the leadership, but the people we're trying to implement technology for?
So, I mean, I'll try to spare the framework and talk about the influence model and all that stuff. But one of the most important techniques that I tend to try to employ when I'm in a client situation. By the way, half the client situations, maybe more, many of the clients don't want you there. It's just the nature of professional services. People don't like having outsiders come in over their shoulder, grade the homework. And over time, you can build real relationships and get past that. But the 2 things that I try to do are, 1, understand who the people are that have the influence in that institution. It's not always the CEO, and often actually they'll be a decision maker, but it's not always them. So really understanding who the influencers are, who has the ear of the key decision makers, and really investing there. So really that influencer kind of network approach is something that I often use. And then the second goes back a little bit to my earlier point, which is, and I know it's hard depending on how long the sales cycle is, but most of business is just relationships. That just has been so reinforced for me over time. So how are you also, if you take the long view of what you're trying to achieve, and I know in a startup there's constraints, how are you investing in building personal relationships with potential decision makers if you take a more medium-term view? And I think a lot of consultants that are new to the profession, even partners, and I have some of the folks in my network who I'm mentoring, they think that the big project or big transformation comes because, like, here you go, here's my proposal. It's really good. Here you go. Let me show you the framework on this is how we do transformations. Never. All my big client situations came because I had a relationship. I had a relationship with an individual that I nurtured over time. And then when the time came for them to need something, they called. And so I guess what I'm saying is the further you can get from something that feels transactional, typically the more successful you'll be. Again, I don't know if it fits your context exactly, but those are at least the things that I've employed.
Hi, thank you for the speech. And many people in CBS wants to transfer to McKinsey, New York. So, like, are there any?
Yeah, I'm taking applications. Hold on.
So, like, are there any specific like skills or qualification that are important, especially for New York?
Not particularly. No, I think one global firm, and so it's pretty. It's pretty standard and uniform. I hate to be a broken record. Super easy. You got to meet some people in New York, in the New York office, ideally who are partners, build a relationship, get to know them, so that when the time comes, when you go down that list of people who want to do it, you say, I know that person. I had a conversation with that person. They sent me this interesting thing. And so skills all the same, you're here. Offices, I took the subway up, I think it was 43 minutes into World Trade, right upstairs. So use the proximity to make connections.
Hey, Shelley, thanks for the time. I had a question on the apprentice kind of model. So given that a BA or an associate might be able to do more work, like, rather than assigning a BA to own a model, they might own the model and something else.
Mhm.
Is it that has there been a shift in like team sizes, is scope of work increasing? Like how do you ensure that there's like the right amounts of density talent density at each level without having like too many EMs and not enough BAs or something like that?
Yeah. And we worked together when I was writing the COVID-19 article, but we never met in person until now because those were different times. So I think we will see some changes. You're right. What someone can do has expanded, if you will, but it goes back to the point I was making earlier, which is the problems that we solve could also be getting more complex. So I don't know what the net effect of that is. I do think we will get to better, more defensible answers, and we will spend actually more time than we did historically on the change management. I actually think, like, at the core of it, I think that is what's going to happen. We will be able to solve the intellectual part of the thing quicker. And we always had to underinvest, by the way, on the change management piece because it took so much time and resources to get the answer. And if I actually reflect on one of the things I do every year is I do a reputational survey across our clients and clients of our competitors around the world so I can get a sense for our reputation. And the change management and seeing it through to impact is a dimension the industry has a lot of opportunity to improve on. And so I do think that you will see a little bit of see a substantial mix shift. Now, the real question that then raises is, does it change the profiles or skill sets that you index for? Maybe.
Thanks. On the economic mobility part that you were talking about before, can you maybe talk about the share of the burden that you think should be on businesses that you're working with versus through government policy?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we haven't tackled it at that level of specificity yet for a few reasons. But what I will say is, my personal view is that I think the balance is off, and I think in many industries the default is, of course, government should be the one that thinks about education. If it's not working though, then at what point do we recognize that it's in no one's best interest to just have government focus on it? And so I don't know the percentage. I don't even know that it applies. I don't even know that I'd frame it at the private sector level as opposed to, are there certain industries that need to index in certain places? I think the answer is probably yes. But I think this is a pretty contentious debate. But my view is it's in the interest of the private sector to think differently than we have historically about, how to create economic opportunity upstream. Some of it, yes, can happen through foundations and philanthropy, but I wonder if that lacks the creativity needed to actually move the needle. I suspect it does.
Hi, thank you for your insights. I also have a question related to the work the Institute in Economic Mobility. I was wondering if you guys have thought about the impact that AI will have or has in economic mobility overall. I personally, I feel like we think about AI as like everyone will have access to it or has access to it, when in reality, that's not necessarily the case. So wondering if there are studies or your insights on that.
So we have not, we have started a number of efforts on this. It's a super, super important and relevant topic. Almost every forum that I'm in. A few thoughts. One, we know that even before we got to kind of generative AI, just AI and automation in general, we know that was going to disproportionately displace lower income workers in a number of fields. And so we already kind of play that forward. And in some places that accelerates. And so there's that piece of it. We also are exploring this idea of how different geographies will be impacted differently and how some may benefit disproportionately. So one of the big things is what happens with the global South in the context of AI, and how do we frame that up so that we can get ahead of what distortions might occur. And so that's a piece we're looking at. I'm actually interested in the flip side of it. Now, we do need to make sure that we get access to as many people as possible. The flip side of AI, if I took a positive frame, would be, what could AI do for education as a supplement to traditional systems? What could it do for healthcare as a supplement to traditional systems? What does AI allow? If AI can bring the cost of doing business down for banks, for example, what does that allow them to do from a product perspective for people who have lower savings and lower income? And so I do think that there's a whole piece around the opportunity that it creates. That's why we want to quickly frame it so we can be out in the world, because it won't happen by itself.
Hi, Shelley, I'm Derek.
Hey, Derek.
Great time today. So you mentioned that early in your career, you pivoted because you thought you might be too hyper-focused on a specific space. However, some may say that being a specialist is a competitive advantage.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how you think about that trade-off in your career.
Yeah. I had this debate with one of my best friends all the time, who was also a CBS alum and now a partner at Blackstone. He's very much in the specialist, and it's worked out very, very well for him, to be clear. Yeah, look, I think there is tremendous value in having deep expertise. I think the key thing you have to be mindful of there is that you either have some way, either you feel really confident that that expertise is durable, or there's enough adjacency to it and you have a continuous learning model that allows you to expand and shift as it becomes, if it becomes less relevant. My personal view, and maybe it's more personality type, I like the ability to kind of see and do lots of different things. But there's certainly pros and cons. The thing that I was doing was very, very specific. So a very specific type of investing. And yeah, there are still some folks doing it now. And I don't know if it's as big as it was then, or bigger or smaller, but it was very, very specific. And so you just have to be thoughtful about whether that thing endures. By the way, it's the same thing at McKinsey when we elect a partner. We say, do you have some expertise that's durable as part of your holistic package? Because things go away. Things are very, the metaverse was popping like 3 years ago. I mean, if you were like deep on the metaverse, you knew something about something. And I'm a huge fan of the metaverse personally. I thought it was going to be big myself. I was like, this is crazy. But I don't know. Now maybe it'll come back. But my point is just people that were doing the metaverse at McKinsey, they either pivoted or they are somewhere else right now. So that's just the one mental model I use.
I think that's it.
That's it.
Sorry, folks.
All right.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.